In my music, I like to sort of hit pause. To me, there's an interesting relationship between that acoustic link between the organ and the acoustics of the space, the construction of the space, and the function of the instrument within that space. And in all types of music that gets played in churches, it already inherently has that aspect of, like, you know that it's going to be something that sounds a certain way and feels a certain way because of the space that it's in. My name is Sarah Davachi, and we are at First Congregational Church in Los Angeles. I grew up playing classical piano. When I got to university in Canada, I took a class in electroacoustic composition. It ended up just like really clicking with how I thought about composition and how I thought about sound. At the same time, I also got a job as a tour guide at a musical instrument museum. At the time, the museum was specifically keyboard instruments. It was a living collection where you could actually play the instruments and hear them. That got me interested in thinking about instruments and timbre. And so that was just like a natural progression back into composition, back into performance. I decided to apply to different composition programs. And the one that I got into, which was my dream school, was Mills College in Oakland. So I went there, did a master's degree in electronic music and recording. So after Mills, I actually moved to Vancouver first. And that's when I kind of started just working on my own music and started releasing music and playing more shows. And then I knew that I wanted to come back to California. I came here in 2017. It's become the place where I'm establishing myself as a musician. The concept that informs my musical interests primarily is timbre and texture and the feeling of sound. When I got into instruments like the organ, I was very interested in the kinds of harmonics and things like that I was hearing, overtones, just really simple acoustic principles that you would hear in music, but that in most music are just kind of skipped over or overlooked. And in order to really create music that serves those things, that allows people to perceive those things in a meaningful way, you need instruments that can sustain their sound or repeat their sound. Every time I approach an instrument, it's really just looking at that instrument specifically or that timbre and seeing what it can do and moving it in a way that makes sense for the sound that I'm trying to achieve. I mean, at the same time that I got into organs, I also got into synthesizers. And in my mind, the organ is an acoustic synthesizer. You build the sound in a very similar way, and you think about sound in the same way from this starting point and then creating your timbres. I mostly use like vintage synthesizers. There's really at the core of those instruments is almost like an acoustic instability, just in the age of the parts and just the construction of the instrument from the time that it's from. So using those instruments that are from the 70s and the early 80s, before there was that real like digital precision that you get later in the 80s, gives this kind of richness to the sound. There's two other electronic instruments that I use a lot, electric organ, and then the mellotron also is one of my favorite, probably my favorite electronic instrument. I also like to use it in a way that's very removed from those connotations of what you'd expect when you think of the mellotron. I tend to think of, I guess, the experimental aspect of my music is really just the moment of the sound that I'm focusing on, that I'm really trying to extend. like in pop music or other types of music that moves at a certain kind of pace, there are certain things that the listener would perceive if given the opportunity, but that are just pushed over. In my music, those are kind of the moments where I like to sort of hit pause and actually let that develop a bit and then explore what's inside of that acoustically. There's always detail and subtlety that you get when things are just slightly out of tune or things are not perfectly aligned, and that's that kind of richness of texture that is attractive to me. When I'm performing, sometimes I like to let things linger a little bit longer than I think people might be comfortable with, because I know that it takes a while for people to just really get comfortable. People fidget or they don't know what to do with their hands. And once you're able to kind of relax and go into that place where you can just listen and you're not worried about nothing else happening, then you can actually have that specific kind of experience. Instruments like this, which is more of like a romantic style of organ, is sort of the more modern organ. It's just on or off the way that the stops go. The main organ are these two that are built into the side walls. And then there's another one at the back, a full organ. The good thing about these kinds of organs, the fact that you can have an organ here and an organ there, and it's all controlled from the same place, is that you can do a lot of different spatial things. But often when you see pipes that are in the back of a church, that's called an antiphonal organ. It's supposed to create kind of this call and response kind of effects in the church, so kind of like an echo. If you were standing at the front of the church, as you walk towards the back of the church, there would be a point where your perception would just switch and you'd kind of stop hearing this organ altogether and only hear that organ. The possibilities are kind of endless of things that you can do and combinations that you can do and different spatial effects that you can do with the instrument are really easy to notice when you're sitting there and you hear the organ just coming from that side or just coming from that side or coming from the back, and then something else comes in and it starts to take over the whole space. So basically the way that all of them work, like I said, on an organ like this, is they just kind of come out or they go in. And when you pull out a stop, you're actually starting the sound. One thing that's interesting on a lot of organs like this is they'll have this 64-foot set of stops, meaning that the longest pipe is 64 feet. Basically what they'll do is they'll just take two 32-foot pipes and connect them together, and then the sum tone or the combination tone creates that 64-foot sound. So this is what that one sounds like. So you can hear it coming out of the front section. If I'm playing this and I pull out these stops, you know, they're there and then they're gone. It's on or off. There's no gradation in it. Old organs, like I said, you can have a bit of that variation in the volume and the pitch changes as it comes in and out. But on romantic organs, often they tend to have swell pedals, which allow you to kind of create that. Changes in volume just by opening up different parts of the organ that are normally not operating. A lot of old organs, like organs that are hundreds of years old, and they all do these really incredible sounds. And I always imagine like people hundreds of years ago discovering those kinds of sounds and what they thought of them, and if they thought that they were interesting, but maybe just a thing that like, oh, I can't use that, I have to do it in this other way. I wonder what people's relationships to the instruments were like at those times. I think a lot of minimalist styles of music and composition are often overlooked in this way of being exceedingly simple. And there's these arguments that, oh, there's not much happening, there's just one note, which is not even the case. That usually in a lot of music that sounds simple, there is a lot happening. The point is that by reducing the means, you have this different kind of experience. You have a more specific experience of the actual sound itself. That experience is what's always kind of driven my music making in one way or another.